Willkommen zum Afasteryou Podcast, wo sich alles um Ausdauersport und Training dreht. Hier geben euch Sebastian Schlurike, Björn Kafka und Niklas Hanker wertvolle Tipps und Einblicke, die euch helfen, eure Performance auf das nächste Level zu bringen.
So,
Hello.
No, I do the introduction.
Yeah, sorry.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Afasteryou podcast. And I'm very happy to have a new guest. And I was really looking for that forward because it's Michael Liberzon. And now it's the other way around because I was quite often in Michael's podcast, the Endurance Innovation podcast. And I'm very happy to have you here. And welcome.
Well, Bjorn, thank you very much for having me over. I think the score now is 3-1, so you're still winning. We've had you on the show 3 times, and this is my first appearance on the Afasteryou podcast. So thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
So the first time I met Michael, I met his friend, Andrew Buckwell. And is it Buckwell, right? Yeah.
Buckwell.
Yeah. And at the what was it?
Was it Eurobike?
Yeah, Eurobike. Was Eurobike. Yes. And he said, yeah, there's this guy with a podcast, Endurance Innovation. He would be pretty nice, and maybe we can invite you. And I was like, So, and then suddenly it happened, yeah. Especially now when I teamed up a little bit more with Aerotune and now with Afasteryou. So, and it was really fun, and I really enjoyed the first conversation we had, and then it continued. And but for me especially, it's more interesting because you have done so many great podcasts, and it's an inspiring thing to listen to them. Also, like Michael Erickson, he has even some more.
He's way ahead of me. Oh yeah.
Yes. The first thing I asked myself, why did you start that podcast? Actually, you know, there's no company behind that, and you don't want to earn money. So why starting a podcast about endurance and innovation?
Yeah, I think our origin story, I'd like to tell it anyway. I think it's kind of fun. But Andrew was a founder of Stack, and Stack was a company that they kind of made their first wave with their magnetic impedance trainer. So it was still a wheel-on trainer. So back in before the direct drive days. But the advantage here was that there was no contact between the actual wheel and the trainer. So it was as silent as you can make your drivetrain. No wear on the tires. So it was a really innovative product. That's where they started. And he was working with doing some marketing with the Triathlon Canada magazine, kind of our local Canadian triathlon coverage magazine. And we had a common contact at the magazine, and she needed some content. So she said, well, why don't you guys talk about Kona? And this was Kona in, I think, 2018. Of course, the Ironman World Championships, Kona. And write me an article on this. Have a conversation, talk about bike positions, because we were both kind of like aerodynamically interested in aerodynamics. And so we did, and we had this hour-long chat. I took notes. I put it in a long-form piece, and I sent it to our friend in the magazine. And she took one quick look at it, and she said, "No one's going to read this. This is like this is so so in the weeds, and so there was so much here that this is not an article that anyone in our magazine is ever going to read." She goes, "But what you guys should do is you should record this, and then maybe you do a podcast or something like that." So that's how that was our the kind of the genesis behind the Endurance Innovation podcast.
Nice story. And you know what? I totally forgot to also say that Niklas is also here. Sorry, I was already so focused and nervous because it was the first time.
No problem, guys.
So I still remember the trainer. It's like this. It's the idea behind it's like in a roller coaster. Yeah, how to break it. Yeah, so with the aluminium and stuff like that. So the idea is quite nice, and I still remember seeing that thing, and it was like, oh, really nice. Yeah, you don't need to. It breaks, and you don't have any noisy stuff around you. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because if you remember, the old trainers are quite loud with the tire noise on the roller.
Yeah.
So, Michael, if I'm right, you have an engineering background, and now you're a triathlon coach, right? So that's the combination with Kona, or the connection.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm a mechanical engineer. So is Andrew. Andrew's actually got his PhD now.
Really?
Yeah, he's beating me in that front, in the degrees front. So we're both engineers. So we were always, and he was, we were both also recreational triathletes. So we both raced, and so we're always looking for that little bit of edge. And like, how do we make it? How do we get ourselves going faster? I actually, I saw a photo of Andrew from, I think like 2016 or 2017 racing, and his position looks like a modern tri position. Like he was super stretched out, not very low in the front, narrow arms. So he was thinking ahead, 10 years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago, about how to make himself the most aerodynamic possible. And that's how we started to get along. And that's how the podcast was born.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think who was also ahead was, I totally forgot his name. What was his name? The guy that was introducing the Mentis position at Team Phonak, who also won the Tour. Come on, please. Also caught with doping. Now selling weed.
Okay.
What's his name? Please.
Yeah. Not sure who you mean.
Floyd Landis.
Okay, yes.
Floyd Landis was actually the first guy who had hip problems, I think, and that's why he had this more or less upright long position and this Mantis position, and everyone was laughing at him. He was riding, and actually he won the Tour. I still remember the stage when he just poured 70 bottles of water over him, and then they caught him with like some crazy numbers. I don't know if it was testosterone, and then anyway, and now he's selling weed, I think, and making some good money. You should check out his website. I don't know if he's still doing it.
It's always interesting to see where people end up from where they started.
Yes.
So, Michael, what's the story behind you're an engineer becoming a triathlon coach? So was it just the way that you do the races by your own? You be an engineer and then you want to become better, and that's the way you learned all the stuff to be a good coach, or what was the story behind?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. As engineers, we're often trained to optimize, systems, right? So like, how do we? Sometimes you're developing something from scratch, but for me, I was always better at taking something that existed and seeing how I can improve it. I'm more an incrementalist kind of thinker. And the other thing that was always really, I guess, fun for me and interesting for me was taking what I learned or I understood and communicating it to others, right? So this was something that was always very interesting for me. If I wasn't an engineer, I probably would have gone into education. That was plan B. And so when I started racing triathlon, again, very recreationally in my late 20s, I realized that there was a lot to this, and that I had a pretty good understanding, and it was growing of how to make a go of it. And I started training with a club, and there were all sorts of other folks who were in the same position that I was, and I enjoyed having these conversations with people. So that's how it started. That's how coaching started. It was very sort of grassroots and natural at first. I would just tell folks what I was doing and explaining why I was doing it. And then I didn't love my job at the time, and one thing led to another. And this was before kids and everything, and before major expenses. So I was like, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to try being a coach full time, and did that for about 8 years, where coaching was the number one thing I did.
Yeah, nice. So when I listen to your podcast, and there are a few that I really, really like, I know that's really hard because you don't want to be too mean to some people you interviewed. But which one is your favorite podcast you did over the years?
Favorite podcast.
You don't have to mention me. Yeah?
That's too. That would be what the engineering professors would call the trivial answer. The obvious answer. What are some of the best ones that we did? There was one of the folks that I really enjoy interviewing, and I hope he's listening, because I've been trying to get him back on the show, is Dan Bigham. So this is like a plug. Yeah. So Dan's stuff is really interesting because Dan is pretty unfiltered. So he's, that when you ask him a question that you're going to get a legit answer. Yeah. And he is also The other thing that I really like is that he is not afraid to try stuff. Like he doesn't get, from my, again, I don't know him very well, but in my interactions with him, he's not stuck on dogma, and he will try all sorts of stuff. So if there's something that I'm curious about, there's a good chance that Dan's already tried it. He's done stuff with like glycerin for cooling, and he's done stuff with, he's got some obviously very forward-thinking and interesting ideas on aerodynamics. I'm sure you remember I think it was the Danish track team with the KT tape on their shins.
Yes.
So stuff like clever ways around rules. He's always just a really fun conversation, as well as being a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think the Dan Bigham's interviews, I think we've had him on twice. Those are high up there for sure.
Yeah. I think Sebastian really has more or less the most experience with him, because they are like on a weekly basis they have a call.
Mm-hmm.
But soon we will have his partner Jamie Loden on the podcast.
Oh, cool.
In a few days, who's now at Wismar. But we also try to get Dan, of course.
I've been talking to Dan. So we, when I was going to relaunch, so we started podcasting in 2018, I think, and we were pretty strong up until 2022. Then took a little bit of vacation because life got busy, and then we brought it back just recently. We relaunched in December of 2024, and I was trying to get Dan on, and we went back and forth. I don't know, at least 6 or 7 times, and we just couldn't pin down a date. So Dan, if you're listening, give me a call. I still definitely want to talk to you.
Yeah, I can tell you that he is pretty heavy aero testing, of course. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. He's got a pretty fun position now.
Yeah.
From all your podcasts you did, which is the top, or which was the episode you learned the most of it? So.
Oh man. So this is a hard question to answer, Nicholas, because again, as I mentioned, we took a break for a couple years in the middle. There were so many that were really interesting. The ones I'll name a couple. There was one that we did, which I'm not sure that I learned that it was an eye-opening podcast. I no longer use what I learned in it, but it was fun at the time, and that was I gotta find the gentleman's name, but it was on using a novel element of HRV analysis to determine your LT1 threshold. So it was a DFA alpha 1 analysis.
What's his name? George. It's
Bruce Rogers.
Bruce
his name.
Rogers.
I'm scrolling. Yeah, I'm scrolling through my feed on another screen here, so I'm cheating. Yeah, Bruce Rogers. That was a really interesting episode because, first we talked to it was Marco Altini who first kind of, he's the HRV for training guy. We've had him on a couple of times. Also, an excellent person to interview. Really enjoy his content. His Substack's great too. But yeah, so Bruce Rogers was the guy who had nothing to do with HRV. He was I think he was a cardiologist, and he just started playing around with this stuff. And that was a really eye-opening interview. And what I really liked about it is in my kind of experience as a coach and as an amateur sort of, tinker, really getting a good understanding of where that first lactic threshold is, or call it whatever you want, is not straightforward, right? There's no, obviously you folks have a really good platform for doing that with AeroTune, but for a while there was no easy way to do it unless you went into a lab. So here was the promise of a totally non-invasive, very basic. All you needed was a pretty good heart rate strap, like something that could give you, peak-to-peak analysis, HRV analysis, which was most of them at the time, not all of them, but most of them. And then you could get, by using this $6 app from Marco Altini, you could peg your lower threshold. And there were some issues with that, with the analysis, but I think on the bike I found it worked quite well. Running, we could never get it to work. No. The data was too messy. But with cycling, for me at least, and the folks I tried it with, the data agreed very well with with what AeroTune did, or we were doing inside testing at the time. There was pretty broad agreement. So this was a nice, easy way to do it, and it was a submaximal test. It was a test that was not hard, that even people who are afraid of testing, who just generally don't drive themselves hard enough to do good testing, they could do this test, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think for indoor it worked really well.
Yes.
Outdoor, I still have it on my Garmin, And outdoor, the data is messy. I think also Marco Altini wrote something about that it's not really working outdoor. And but I'm not sure. I think I have read something about that. But for indoor, it really worked well. And now you can play around with it. Especially, it was interesting for me because you only need 2 numbers to generate all the other ones. Yeah, and if you have like the LT1, Fatmax, or whatever you want to call it, and then maybe doing a VO2 max test or even a sub maximum lactate steady state test, you can calculate everything out of that. Yeah, and this was a very nice and fun way to see how it works. Yeah, and you also see some correlation. We also tested that with SMO2, something like Moxie and things like that. So we also saw that there is some kind of correlation. But as always, you have great ideas, and not everyone is having like a Moxie and things like that.
Sure,
So,
Moxies are a little bit of a range.
but the idea, because it was so cheap is cheap and handy to use, and you still in the Garmin App Store and the IQ Store, you get this now more or less for free. The DFA1 Alpha.
Oh, I didn't see that because I mean I played around with it when it first hit the news, but I honestly haven't touched it in
now it works
4 years.
And you see it constantly, but the data is like when I ride outside, it's like I'm not sure. Inside it looked better.
I got to try it again, definitely.
Yeah. So for me, I have two fascinating podcasts you did. The one was the guy about heat. I don't know which one it was because you had many.
We've covered that topic in depth. Yeah,
and I think he was from South America. I'm not sure.
Was it before? Was it before our hiatus, or was it a recent one?
It was before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
The new one I listened from the guy from Precision. What's
Precision Hydration? Yeah, Lindsay Hunt. So we had Lindsay Hunt from Precision Fuel and Hydration, and then we also had.
This was also nice, very straightforward. But the other one was more like on the engineering side, and
he's a sports scientist. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was quite an interesting one. And the other one, which one I really enjoyed, was the one with the Greek professor from England. The name I don't want to...
Kostas Karageorgis. Yes.
You learned. You tried that a lot.
I was ready. I knew that one. You were going to talk about that one. Yeah.
I love that one. It's really good because the guy is so cool.
Yeah. I think you and I have talked about this before, but he was. We've done. I don't know. We're on episode 163 or something like that. So I've recorded a few of these episodes, and he was unique in the sense that he just. It's like he walked into the room virtually, of course, because we weren't sitting together, and he delivered a lecture.
Yes.
And that's what he did. It wasn't an interview. I asked him some questions, but no, he was just, he delivered, presented his material, and obviously it was very polished, very well put together, and I've never experienced that before. Usually where, I have to, with some guests, they have some stuff prepared, and they're a little bit smoother than others. With others, I really have to tease, and as podcasters, you guys know, you have to tease the information out. This guy, he sat down and he delivered the content, and it was just it was great. I just sat back and I listened, and it was a lot of fun.
We had that the last time when we talked with Enrique Avancini. We talked for 2 hours straight.
Sometimes that can be a problem because that's not what you want, and that's
of course.
Yeah, there are people who sorry to interrupt you, but like who I as a podcaster, I have an idea of what I'm trying to do, and if you're making a right turn when I need you to go straight. I need to interrupt you and put you back on the, in the direction I want you to go. But this guy, everything he said was gold.
Yeah, and with Enrique Amici, he just told the whole life story of becoming a mountain bike, one of the best mountain bikers in the world, and was like a fascinating story. And everyone was writing, "Oh, what a great story!" And I was like, "Yeah, we were sitting here for 2 hours straight, or 2.5 hours, and he was constantly talking."
It was crazy. It was for us. It was super easy. I prepared a lot of questions and something, but he was just talking, and we were happy because it was a perfect story from start to finish. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Amazing.
Sorry. So with everything you saw in your podcast, I mean, also with the break, what do you see? What are the hot topics now in endurance sports? Did it change?
What's hot in endurance sports? So I'm to be perfectly honest, Bjorn, I'm still kind of in the phase of crawling out of my cave and taking a peek around, if I was a hibernating bear for 2 years. And I still paid attention to this stuff, of course, but I wasn't as plugged in because we weren't recording every week. But in terms of what folks are paying attention to, and my bias is triathlon, right? So that's most, the folks that I coach, 80% of them are triathletes. The sport that I pay attention to the most is triathlon. Obviously, road cycling is in there and running is in there, but triathlon, that's my bias. So with that said, I think what's happening, aerodynamics obviously still a developing discipline. That's something that endurance innovation, if we had two hats that we wear, it's aerodynamics and heat transfer. Those are the things that we love the most to talk about. So aerodynamics is still a developing sport. Obviously, the nice thing in triathlon is you don't have UCI regulations to work with. ITU and World Triathlon have you can't recumbent and you can't fare your bike. You can't do some of these interesting things, but there are far fewer regulations than you have with UCI. So a lot of the innovation does come from triathlon, I found, on the aero side. You can do more stuff. So that's definitely there. The one that I'm the most excited about, and I'm biased, obviously, is thermal management. Because, you can be very well trained and very aerodynamically efficient and totally fall apart because your core body temperature just hits a certain threshold at which you, either drastically slow down or stop completely. And even at lower temperatures, there are sort of like psychobiological effects that will cause you to produce less mechanical power because your body is trying to conserve. So one of the things that we're thinking a lot about and talking to a lot of smart people about is how to manage that. So those are obviously like still my two top favorite fields. I think the other one that is interesting that I'm having some conversations around is supplementation, right? So I've always been kind of, not always, but for the last, let's say 10 years, very skeptical of supplements, in except for, the obvious ones like caffeine and carbohydrates. But now with the reemergence, at least into the public eye of things like sodium bicarbonate, a lot of people are paying more attention to it. We just recorded a podcast, it was almost a month ago, that I haven't yet published with Morton and their system. So that's going to be the next one that we publish. And then I was also speaking with a cycling coach out of the UK who also uses bicarbonate quite extensively. And it seems like there's, it's what people would say maybe would be a small but reliable ergogenic effect of bicarbonate supplementation. So that one's pretty interesting. So I don't know. Those are my top three right now, Bjorn.
Yeah. So bicarbonate is quite interesting. Yeah. Not only because of buffering, because also of heat. Yeah. You retain more water in your body, so that can be
the sodium load is high. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. It can be very interesting. Especially for a one-day race, you don't want to carry all the water in the Tour de France. And adaptation-wise, over long term, there are some minor effects, but I'm not sure. There are also some effects with beta-alanine, also in the long term. So we'll see in the next years. And I was just thinking before we thought about what to ask. A few days ago, I got a study, a very new one. I think it was from South Africa, and they did low carb. I think it's coming back. Keto is coming back. I'm really afraid.
No. I'm afraid. Yeah, you know what? You said it. I was going to say it, but I mean, we've been on this train before, I think, and yeah.
So, what do you think? What is coming back?
What is coming? Well, bicarb is coming back because bicarb was a thing in the 70s and 80s, and it was just nobody could tolerate it. But now that there's new formulations, so I think bicarb's coming back. I do think it was funny. I had this conversation with Michael Liberzon, and you mentioned him earlier. He was on our show, and he reposted the conversation we had. And one of the things he said, we were talking about just how to make sense of all the training data and how to find reliable training resources. And his point was most of the things that are that folks are talking about and they're being packaged as new and novel kind of interventions, they're not new. Somebody before has tried this way of training and basically what, and then it fell out of fashion because coaches change and ideas change, and then the pendulum swings back and it becomes a new thing. So we've been through the low carb thing before. I'm not surprised that it's coming back because someone out there is going to make some money on it to, tell folks that this is the best way of training, and if you're not doing this, you're doing it wrong. And we found this new secret of, living forever and always being young and, running 2-hour marathons. But I hope it doesn't come back as much as in the way that it did before. As far as what else is coming back, that we've seen in the past, I think some of the ideas around training, some of the stuff that we've sort of heard about before and then are coming back would be things like double days. Mm-hmm. That's something that I'm hearing a lot about, both from like the Norwegians doing like double threshold sort of work. The UK cycling coach that I was interviewing, he does double VO2 max work, mm-hmm. and he sees a very potent effect from that. So doubling up AM, PM, very hard sessions, like kind of 9s out of 10, 2 to 3 times a week, which to me sounds horrible. But if you can survive it, I'm sure there is quite a substantial fitness improvement. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm seeing.
I think that the thing that will change it that every training method, every strategy we used in the past will come back, because with the time we will learn how to use it right. I think low carb will have an effect on everyone, and it can be used to make someone better if it's used right. So I think that's the thing we will learn in the next years. For every strategy out there, we will learn how to use it right, when to use it, and that's, I think, the point. Not everyone is good for low carb is not good for everyone, but on some persons, on some metabolic profiles, maybe it's good. So we just need to learn when and how to use.
I had a funny conversation this morning with an old World Tour rider. I was riding at a very, very big, famous team, and they were doing low carb during that time, big time, and he didn't understand it really. So he was riding 2 hours low carb, no eating, and then he stopped at a cafe eating some cake, continue. And then he was, I just did the right low carb, and then I just refueled. And then, no, you're not allowed to do it. You're allowed to drink a protein shake. And then he never did it. He was still like, he was, 5 times, 6 times to the France rider. And he said, no, that was so shitty, that training.
Yeah.
I
think that's what people forget, is just how much it sucks. Like if you do it like the way that it was, I remember hearing about doing it, it's a terrible way to train. It's if you have anything outside of training in your life, like if you have a full-time job, if you have a family, like you become a terrible, hang on, I'm going to speak for myself. I was a terrible human being when I tried to do low carb, and it's not worth it for me holistically as just like a human to do this to myself and to my family and to my coworkers, because that was really no fun. That's not what I'm all about. But Nicholas, what you were saying earlier about how we how we learn to do things better. I agree. I also think that, especially and Michael and I spoke about this, with sort of the propagation of the information coming at us a lot from social media and people who have sort of an incentive to oversimplify, right? So to say, okay, this is the reason you're not a good athlete is because you do this wrong. So if you change this one thing, you're going to be a better athlete or better human being, better whatever the thing you're trying to be better at. Everything all at once, right? And so if you oversimplify things, then you lose the nuance, Nicholas, that you were talking about, is that it's correct in certain applications for certain people. I totally agree with that statement. I think that's very fair, and I think most coaches would agree as well. But if you say, no, high carb is bad, low carb is good, or the other way, like low carb is always bad and high carb is always good, then you do lose that nuance. And that's an easy message to sell to people. And I think that's why the messaging works. And the nuanced position of, no, you have to really think about what context this is appropriate in and when it's not appropriate. That's not easy. You cannot package that into a neat little box and then feed it to somebody through a 30-second Instagram slot and then say, pay me some money so that I can show you how not to eat potatoes. That message is harder to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, like this is always there are simple problems and there are complex problems, and they are not easy to solve, especially not on your own, or you need some more time to do that.
Yes.
And I mean, like it's the same with politics. Yeah, get simple simple answers. And
there are a lot of people right now who are peddling simple answers. I think
so
that's the case.
The people are afraid of complex questions and answers. Yeah, so it's black and white. So. Always a problem.
I think for most of the athletes and for most of the athletes who are listening here, is in the beginning it's relatively simple. So start cycling, being healthy, that's the baseline. So if you do 90% of the time just easy riding, eat your 30 to 60 grams of carbs, you would be healthy and it's good. And if the problem, I think, is if you get better and better and better and increasing, it always gets more complicated because you always want to get better, and then it starts not being easy, and then you need to have enough people who are analyzing your stuff and give you some ideas and some context to see how you can make it better. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think in the beginning everything works. I think this is a line that Bjorn, this is your line. It's your voice in my head when I say everything works. It's your voice that I hear. It's like, yeah, in the beginning everything works, and I think that's very true.
You know, the couch in my you see in my back. If I lay down there for 3 weeks, I will have an adaptation. Maybe not the 100%, but it works. Yeah? Yeah. And yesterday I got a nice study about strength training and running for 6 weeks.
Okay.
Recreational runners, and the athlete told me, "Oh, look at that! How amazingly it works." And I said, "Yes, they never did strength training, and they did it for 6 weeks, and I wonder why magically they can squat more, and maybe they have a little bit better running economy. But in your case, you are already like 60s plus VO2 max, female." Of course, strength training makes sense, but I can't promise you these gains, and I'm not sure if we should start that regime, because we have to sacrifice other things that are maybe more important. So always, as you mentioned, Niklas, the context of where to put it and with who I'm really dealing. So everything works, yeah, and especially for 6 weeks, everything works. If I put you through the meat grinder, crazy training, double VO2 max days, you will get better.
Yes. Yeah. Novelty of stimulus is very powerful. I think that's something that we found out pretty early on. That if you change it, something will change.
Yes. And this is really a very simple idea of training. Yeah. As a good coach, you just look, wow, what did we do the last 6 months? Okay, we change. And if I constantly change, it doesn't matter what. As long as it's a stimulus, you will get better in some area, yeah? Maybe not always target-wise, but you will get better. Pretty simple. Change your system, and you will constantly get better. Mm-hmm. So, coming back to your podcast, where do you still find, I mean, like for Michael, it must be way more harder, Michael Eriksson, where do you find guests and inspiration who to invite?
Well, I found that's a great question. And I was thinking about Michael too about it, because he and I had this conversation a few years ago. But what I found worked really well for me is to not podcast for 2 years. and then there's a bunch of stuff that happens, and then you know, in your life and in the outside world, and then you have all sorts of new ideas. But what I like is I get inspiration from podcasts and from reading, reading certain things. Like there was I made a joke about this on my show. There's a Canadian journalist, Alex Hutchinson, who's quite famous. He wrote Endure, and he's about to publish a new book. And sometimes, I mean, the joke that I made was that if we monetized our podcast, I should be paying Alex royalties, because so many of my podcast ideas come from his outside articles. And so I'll read his article and be like, this is really interesting. And I'll look up the papers, and I'll look up the people who wrote the papers, and I'll talk to those people, and then I'll get them on the show, because he's really good at bridging the gap between relevant and interesting, right? And that's kind of what I want in the podcast. I want it to be relevant to the people who listen, and I also want it to be interesting, and mostly for me, because I do this only for myself, because we don't monetize it, right? Until very recently, we weren't pushing any kind of products, and we're not pushing it very hard. So it's just for fun. It's to learn, and so those are the two things that I look for. Is it do I think I can make a fun episode from it, and is it relevant to what we're doing? That's pretty much it.
Yeah. So everyone who hadn't read the book from Alex Hutchinson, and you're really do it. It's great, and he's making a new one. I didn't know that. Oh, that's really good.
He's publishing a new one. I don't know what it's about, but I'm sure it's in the same kind of sphere,
same area.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk a little bit about the stuff you produced and are producing now. And we had contact. I think it was shortly before the Olympic Games.
Yes.
I was in Sweden on a holiday trip, and you said, Björn, I have this cool thing, and it was a very secret thing. And I was more in the woods in Sweden than in looking at papers. But yeah, you produced a very cool, interesting cooling device and drinking device, I would say, for triathlete. Maybe you can describe it and where the idea came from, because I think it's quite interesting to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the throw to let me talk about the product we're trying to sell. I always appreciate that, Björn. So this idea came out of Andrew.
I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a cool product. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Like most things in what endurance innovation does, this idea came out of Andrew's brain. He was his PhD is actually in fluid transfer, heat transfer. That's kind of what he does. And if you take endurance sport even at all seriously, you've probably had an experience where you were in a hotter than normal race situation or even training, and you realize that, hey, I'm going a lot slower than I want to. I'm going a lot slower than I think based on my training, and this doesn't feel very good, and I'm not getting the results I want. So there's an obvious problem, and it hits differently to different people. Obviously, adaptations matter, and body size matters, and duration and pace, all that stuff matters. But the problem exists. And so as Andrew was trying to solve this problem, the story that he tells is that he was inspired by a BBC Nature documentary where he watched kangaroos licking their forearms. And then they had some infrared imaging on the kangaroos, and their forearms were a lot cooler because, of course, in the Australian outback, it's very, very hot, but it's also very, very dry. And so evaporative heat transfer works very well. But kangaroos don't sweat, or they are not very efficient at sweating, not like humans. Humans, we are excellent at shedding heat because we sweat. We sweat, I think, more than any other species of animal on the planet. We're much more efficient at it than anyone else, any other species. So he saw these kangaroos licking their forearms. Their forearms were cooler, and that's how they were maintaining homeostasis in terms of core body temperature. And then he realized that, hey, wait a minute, when we're on our time trial or triathlon bikes, our forearms are in a fixed position, right? They're not moving around, not like a traditional road bike. And the forearms might be an interesting area for heat transfer. So not only are they fixed in space, which is good if you're trying to design a product that keeps you cool, but also there's pretty good vascular density that's quite close to the skin on the forearms. And it's one of the better areas for cooling even on humans. So that was the genesis of the idea. He then, of course, being the scientist that he is, he went and tested it. So there was a study that he was a co-author on that was done out of the University of Waterloo here in Ontario, Canada. with the partnership. I think they partnered with the Department of Defense, the Canadian Defense Department, and they stuck some cyclists into a heat chamber, and they pumped 7 degrees Celsius water through a heat exchanger, and the heat exchanger was strapped to the forearms, the inner forearms of these cyclists. And the results were pretty interesting. So they did find a meaningful effect. I think on average, core body temperature was lower by something like 0.4, 0.5 degrees. So not trivial. Yeah, quite substantial.
Yes, absolutely.
Heart rate was reduced by, I forget what the average was. Andrew was he was a bit of an outlier. His heart rate was lower by a whole 10 beats per minute at the end of the test, which is quite high.
Yeah.
And RPE was obviously lower, like thermal comfort was better. So the study, which, happy to send you folks if you want to take a look at it. Once they proved that the concept works, that the kangaroos aren't crazy, that this is a reasonable way to keep athletes cool, then Andrew, when he was still with Stack, started developing this bottle. Stack was acquired by 4 Eyes, so the development of the bottle kind of stopped at that point, and then we picked it up as Endurance Innovation a couple of years ago. So one of the reasons, or at least one of the, let's say, excuses that I haven't been podcasting for 2 years is because we were working on this bottle. So there are 3 of us now. There's Andrew, myself, and Phil Hare. Phil is our, genius mechanical designer. You kind of give him an idea and you tell him what it should look like, and he will draw it up and he will 3D print it, and then he will find folks in, either locally or overseas to make it for you. And fast forward through that whole development process, we now have a product that is commercially available. It's not vaporware. We actually have 1,000 units of these things in Calgary. We just took delivery. And the idea there is that it's a bottle that sits between the aero bars on a triathlon or time trial bike. Triathletes will be very familiar with this setup, as it's a very common place to put a bottle. It's aerodynamically efficient. It closes up some gaps and it fills some area between the forearms and the head or the torso of the athlete, depending on what your position looks like. It holds about 1 liter of fluid, and the idea there is you would fill up the bottle with either water or whatever your preferred sport drink is. You would put it in the freezer. This is one use case. You would freeze it, and then you have basically a heat sink that has quite a bit of thermal density. And the beautiful thing here is using the phase change of ice to store that thermal mass, because in the example that we like to give, the heat required to melt some mass of ice, in our case it's a kilogram, is the same heat that would raise the temperature of the same mass of liquid water by 80 degrees. Mm-hmm. So you would, if you're melting 1 liter of ice, it's the same heat required as to take that same liter of liquid water from 0 centigrade to 80 degrees centigrade. So it's a huge amount of heat that ice. It's not that it's storing heat; it's the opposite. It's absorbing heat in order to melt. So that's the idea. That heat comes from your body. We have a little neoprene cover to make sure to minimize the environmental heat gain. So it's mostly coming from you, the athlete. Lasts about 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the conditions. Mm-hmm. And then when the ice is done melting, you have a straw in the bottle through which you can drink the liquid. So you're going to be carrying those fluids anyway, especially in longer course triathlon races. And now you have the opportunity to use it for cooling, and then you would drink the fluid afterwards.
Cool idea.
Could I also use it to put it in my jersey? So in my back pocket of the jersey. So just for normal road cyclists or mountain bikers.
Mm-hmm. So it's not a bottle in the traditional sense, and I should have come prepared. I don't know if we were recording a video or not, but I actually don't have one sitting in front of me. But it is shaped in such a way. It's not shaped like a round bottle. So I've got a round bottle with me for those of you listening. It's not shaped like our traditional round bottle. It has a specific profile, because one of the engineering challenges that we had is we wanted to make sure that this bottle would contact the inner forearm on a number of different positions, right? Like you can easily design something for one person, but we need to design something for almost everybody. So there's quite a bit of stack adjustment in the way that we design the mount. So that's the vertical adjustment, and also reach adjustment, of course. But in order to make that work, especially with folks who are, let's say, more on the pointy end of aerodynamics and are riding really narrow elbows, and versus folks who are maybe a little bit more, more motivated to be more comfortable and are riding wider elbows, we needed that bottle to maintain that contact. So the way you do that is you adjust stack, so you go up and down, but the wedge shape of the bottle allows for that contact regardless, well, not regardless, but within a fairly broad range of stack width on the pads. And so as a result, and also we were trying to make it aerodynamically optimized. It looks like a Cold War Russian submarine more than it does a traditional round bottle. And so it probably wouldn't be a really good fit in your jersey pocket unless you had giant pockets. And then on the other hand too is it has a little fill port on it. So in triathlon long course, you have aid stations. So you could grab a bottle from the aid station and fill it up if you were empty, or take a bottle from somewhere else on the bicycle and fill it up. So then it's also not completely watertight unless it's in its kind of horizontal position. So you might get some leaks in your jersey bottle as the ice starts to melt.
Yeah.
All right. Nice.
Yeah.
So now triathletes are happy, but road cyclists have problems. But they have cars pouring water over their head. But this is also always a problem because there are not too many bottles in the cars, and you always have to pick them up. I think there's one company producing a bottle with like crushed ice. Is it Flow bottle or something like that?
Yeah. So
are there any other devices? I mean, like, you are really deep into that. Yeah, I'm just like a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So yeah, Flow bottle is really interesting. I think they're out of New Zealand, and they were. It was Paul Larson, who was a Canadian sports scientist, but he worked with the New Zealand Federation for a while. So he developed it, I think, with a university out there. So the Flow bottle is really cool. But one thing that we're going to try to do is, because we use just a 3/8 inch, or what's that in metric? Roughly 1 centimeter hose, vinyl hose that we're using for a drinking straw. And if you remove the bite valve that sits on top of this thing, we're pretty sure, we haven't tried it yet, but we're pretty sure that we can use crushed ice in our bottle, so that we can drink crushed ice on the bike. Again, for triathletes, that doesn't help the road cyclists. And kudos to the idea to Bevan McKinnon, who is a triathlon coach in New Zealand and also a podcaster. He's like, hey, this thing's cool. Could you put crushed ice in it? I'm like, we never thought about it, but we probably could.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like you doing two things. Yeah, you have the cooling on the arms, and you have the huge surface from the crushed ice and cooling your body. Very efficient. Yeah?
For sure. And the reason that crushed ice works, and Bjorn, sorry if you don't want me to talk about this, but but if you can, so what I was talking about ice and the phase change of ice being exceptionally powerful for heat transfer. The trick is, if you have ice and you're just, you have it in your drink, let's say, right? And the ice melts in the drink, and then you're drinking the cold water. That's fine. And what that ice is doing is it's keeping your water cool. But the melting of the ice, which is where all the magic happens, is happening outside of your body, if that makes sense. So if you're like an engineer and you want to talk about control volumes, you're outside of your, body control volume. But if you can take that piece of ice and eat it, then the ice melts inside your body, your control volume, and all of the cooling benefit from the melting of that ice, that phase change, is inside you. That's the best case scenario. So that's why crushed ice is so powerful. It's obviously much easier to drink than solid chunks of ice, famously. And when that crushed ice melts inside your mouth, inside your stomach, that heat transfer is exceptionally powerful because it's all contained inside you. The bottle is kind of there, but not exactly. It's still outside of you, but we have the bottle insulated, and the contact patch is with the human. So it's not quite as efficient, but it's close.
Yeah. Very interesting, especially now with the climate change and everything. It becomes more and more a problem or a challenge to do. And I'm still like, the last 3 years, the heat waves we had, also especially in road cycling, you have great numbers from the riders, and the adaptation to that, and also the cooling strategy is actually where the magic happens now. It's I would say the rider who can cool the best and also has the best body shape for that will win. Yeah, I mean, like look at Patrick Lange. Yeah, I mean, like he had
for sure.
like a major advantage.
Yes.
In the race, this year.
Absolutely.
Or last year, yeah.
And your point about, so obviously climate change is a factor, but also as we get faster, right? Like if you think about, is if you're trying to push physiology ever higher, like you're trying to produce more watts. Well, what's gross efficiency on a bike? Roughly 25%.
Yeah.
Right. So for every 10 watts that you're improving your sustained power, you're creating 30 watts of heat.
Yes.
Right, because that's where the rest of the stuff goes, which is something that kind of boggles your mind if you think about it. If you're riding at, 300 watts, your metabolic cost is 1,200 watts, give or take, which means 900 watts is heat. Yes. So your body has to figure out what to do with 900 watts. That's a lot of, that's like, not quite an oven, but it's halfway there. It's a lot of thermal energy, thermal power.
The problem we're dealing with heavier riders. I mean, like maybe you have the same threshold.
Also, yes, yeah.
First of all, we have the problem with nutrition. Getting all the energy in. So lighter riders maybe better.
Yes.
And then the thermal stress. If you are 190 and 80 kilos and maybe have 6 watts at threshold. I mean, like you're a living radiator, It's
basically, you don't need to heat the house in the winter, And the one thing that we were kind of kicking around the idea of using it in road cycling is just for pre-cooling, right? So obviously there's lots of pre-cooling solutions already. Our idea works as per cooling in triathlon, like cooling during activity, which is really great. But in cycling, we can't use it. Well, in UCI cycling, we're not allowed to use it. But as a pre-cooling strategy, I think that could be really interesting, especially in really hot races. You can still wear the vest, right, on the torso, but you could also use our device and then cool the forearms, and then just get more net cooling in the beginning, and have a higher magnitude effect before you even start the event.
Yeah.
So to summarize for our listeners, what are your best strategies for cooling during a race? So not just even in for the triathletes. So also, what do you say to your road cyclists, to your mountain bikers, or some runners to cool down during the race?
Okay. Yeah. Great question. So it sort of depends on the conditions, but I think the more just understanding that if you are in dry conditions, even if it's quite hot, then evaporative heat transfer is going to be very effective. If you're in it for a long time, you might start running into problems where it's just not sufficient. Like your body is sweating, but you're losing, body water, and eventually you're going to start to dehydrate, and that's going to become a problem. So spraying cold water on yourself is always a really good idea. It works exceptionally well in dry conditions because that evaporative heat transfer is very, very efficient, even if it's quite hot. So if you have aid stations, or if you're carrying your own water, spraying it on yourself is very powerful. That's always a good idea. For the slushy drink that we discussed, anytime you can have ice, especially if it melts inside your body, is a very powerful way to do it. For supported races where you have, like, let's say a team car, if they can give you the flow bottle is just one example. I think it's the only one I can think of. But if you're carrying some kind of nutrition in the flow bottle where you can get that into your mouth, super powerful way to go. For cyclists, I know one way to do something similar to what we're doing with the Cool bottle, and this was, I can't remember who introduced this to me, but the women's pantyhose full of ice wrapped around your neck on the back. I think that's very powerful because as that ice melts, it then obviously you're going to lose some of that. Let me rephrase that. Obviously, some of the energy to melt the ice is coming in from the environment, especially if it's on your back, but a lot of it is also coming from your body. So that's quite effective. If you are running, again, sticking with ice, there's lots of things you can do with ice. If you have, I don't know if you noticed this, guys, but there was a couple of folks in Kona this year, it was a men's race this year, who had really big baggy hats, and they would pack their hats with ice, and they would put the hats on their head. So you don't have it doesn't look very aerodynamic. It looked like, Andrew made the joke that it looked like the Super Mario hat.
It's a me.
Yeah, exactly. It's a me, Patrick Lange. I think it was him, or maybe it was Magnus Ditlev who had this hat. Anyway, and they're commercially available, so you put ice in it and just put it on your head. It's super simple. Again, the ice melts and it keeps your head cold. Holding on to ice cubes is not a bad idea because you can kind of close your fist around the ice cube, and your control volume is pretty good because most of the energy absorbed by the ice to melt is coming from your hands. Again, the hands are also very heavily vascularized, so you have got pretty good heat transfer there. So lots of good options. I would look for the special sauce would be look to try to use ice as much as possible versus just cool water, unless it's quite dry, in which case dumping cool water on yourself is also quite effective.
Yeah, and then you also have heat adaptation trainings, things like that. I think
absolutely
you covered that quite a few times in your podcast. Very, very interesting. So actually, in triathlon, I'm not sure if it's still that common. These things, kind of, they look like
Omias?
These, are they still a thing, or do they work?
So yeah, great question. So the Omias headband is super neat. I think we had Gustavo, forget his last name. Anyway, the founder, when the first thing came out, and their marketing was really interesting. So kudos to those guys for doing an awesome marketing job. They just showed up to Kona one year, and Kona is always hot, Hawaii. They showed up to Kona one year, and they just gave these out to the pros.
Yeah,
they're like, here, you take one. You want to wear it, you don't want to wear it, do your thing. And that's how they got to the point where in the Paris Olympics that just happened this summer, you had guys like Ilya Kipchoge who was wearing one for the marathon, and that's obviously a big marketing get for Omias. But so do they work? It's really there's the one study that I've seen on efficacy from the guy who we had on our podcast blanking on his name, and we just talked to him. Antoine Jolicoeur Desroches, that guy, from Sherbrooke in Quebec here in Canada. And he tested it, and he found that there was thermal comfort benefits at sub-maximal intensities. Yeah. No core temperature impact, which is, I think Omia says the same thing. There's just not enough surface area to make a difference. But definitely a comfort, there seems to be a comfort win, and whenever you feel more thermally comfortable, there's good evidence to suggest that you're actually going to go faster because your body isn't as worried about thermal regulation as it would be otherwise. So it's a little bit of a trick, but it does appear like it does make people go a little bit faster at submaximal intensity. So if we're talking about anything, I would say longer than a 5K race, if you're a runner, obviously you can't wear this on the bike. But running, if it's longer than 10K, you might have a benefit of using this device. It's a really cool idea. It's just a giant heat sink with a very large surface area on your forehead.
Yeah, if your head feels cooler, then you maybe can push harder. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you can go a little bit faster. There's less noise, in preventing you from pushing harder. I would say if you're feeling a little bit more thermally comfortable.
Perfect. So the Cape Epic, the mountain bike race, is of course around the corner, and I just always try to invent something to make the riders cooler. So it's always quite complicated because it's an unsupported race. They start in the morning. They have boxes where they just put their stuff overnight. So now. I have to think about how to cool things before, and it's always complicated. Mm-hmm. And you also have the aspect of is the stuff really in an environment where it's still like no germs and stuff like that, because it's also a big problem in Africa, at that race, because you have like 1,000 people. They are always using. Some toilets, and you always have problems with diarrhea and things like that. So you also have to think about this. You really want to have your bottles 12 hours somewhere. You really don't know. So maybe putting something over the hose or stuff like that. So I just one of the podcasts I listened to you or two actually. I took some notes. And also with like ergonomics, maybe some things you can take to feel or having a better thermal comfort. There are some things you can maybe use, taurine, for example. And yeah, always working on that.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things that keep coming up, and that's why there's always going to be, because the way I think about it, Bjorn, is that you've got so many people who are motivated either by like curiosity or by financial gain to, improve performance, right? And there's so many people working on it that some people are going to come up with something that's interesting and something that hasn't been tried before, or has been tried before, but it's being packaged in a slightly different way. And with the right context, like we spoke about earlier, may be very useful now when it wasn't before. Like bicarbonate. Before it wasn't useful because the context for it was wrong. We didn't have a good delivery vehicle for it, right? And now we have different means of ingesting it, which is better tolerated, and then you can get the performance benefit from it. Yeah. So because of that, I think there's always going to be interesting material for folks like us to talk about, because there's just so many people working on it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Niklas, do you have any more questions?
No, not for the moment. I'm just now thinking of how we could use cold bottles in cycling to cool us down better, even in races like the Cape Epic, and how to use crush ice. Yeah, I think that's a big point for races. Like we are getting the race is always getting hotter now, and we have the heat adaptation. But I think we should also need some ideas like your ice bottle, also in mountain biking or in road cycling. So I think there's some potential for it.
But I can, sorry to interrupt, but I can tell you from my perspective, one of the biggest problems is the resistance from some riders, but also from their guys that physios and things like that to prepare that. This is really a problem. Okay, we need crushed ice for that race. Mix the drink, do this and that. And they're like, oh no, we can't do that. I'm just like, why can't you do that? No, we don't have a machine for that. I'm just like, buy a thing that costs 30 euros.
Yeah, basically.
Or whatever, and just crush the stuff you prepared. It's like, no, they don't do that. So this is really a very frustrating moment sometimes. And
I believe it.
Even in big World Tour teams. And but sometimes you have teams that are really way ahead and really preparing that. And I think it's... it sometimes comes down to some really simple problems to solve, but they are not willing to do that. Yeah,
yeah, for sure. I was just thinking for mountain biking, and this is a sport I know very little about, but do folks still use hydration packs, or is that a thing of the past? So I'm wondering if you could design a hydration pack that you could use crushed ice in, because the hoses for the packs, what I was talking about, they should be big enough to pass crushed ice. The problem is the bite valves, right? So the bite valves obviously would be a problem, would be a restriction. But if we could come up with something that with a different bite valve that you could use, that's the innovation, right? Like that is the thing you could IP and get sell hydration bladders that are designed for crushed ice.
Oh, that's a really good idea, yeah, and maybe cutting out the soft part out of the thing, so that you have like a direct contact to that bottle, or like the valve.
Yeah, you could get double duty. Again, you would have heat transfer to the back, and then you could consume the crushed ice.
Okay.
Now we just need the contact to USVEs or some other hydration pack company to make this.
Very good. So we have a case.
It would work for running too. Actually, it's a really interesting idea. I'm going to talk to Andrew and Phil. They're going to tell me to get back in the box and start selling the cool bottle, and before you come up with new ideas.
So at the end, where can people find you and the product that you invented? And
so we are, what are we on? We're on Instagram as Endurance Innovation, and the podcast is the same name. So we're available. The podcast is available on all the common platforms. And the website, which you can find on our Instagram page, but the website is eitech.io. EI is Endurance Innovation. That's where it comes from. Tech, so eitech.io. And that's where you can get all the information about the bottle. Order yourself a bottle if you are interested. I hope you do. And that is, and then listen to the podcast as well. Also fun for us to make.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for your time. I think you have to go to work now, to real work.
I got to start my day, yes. Thanks very much, guys. It was a real treat. It's always fun to be on the other side of the microphone, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.